Welcome to Marriage Monday, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're so happy to have you with us this evening, spending your Monday evening with us.
Yeah,
very grateful.
So great to have everybody here. Listen, we've got a whole bunch of people with us again this Monday night. We got all our marriage fans, or maybe we should
fans
start
of
saying,
marriage.
We got our marriage nerds. They're with us too. We're marriage nerds. We love marriage, and we love everything all about marriage. And so many of you guys do too. It's good to have you here, and we are so grateful that you put your marriage as a very important part of your life.
That's true.
Thanks for joining us.
That's true. Yeah. We've been in a series on triggers and traps, marriage triggers and traps, having a great time discovering a lot of things about ourselves. Hope you've been enjoying that, and we're here to do that again tonight, as promised.
That's right. So let's talk. Let's go ahead, just jump right in. We're going to be talking, as Lisa said, about triggers and traps. Of course, that's a huge industry, right? Everybody's writing all kinds of books on that, or at least smart people are. But we just thought, if that happens to you individually, of course, it's going to happen in your marriage. So we want to talk about triggers and traps in your marriage. So let's go back in the definition. It's almost like we don't need to define what a trigger is.
It's true.
Because we all kind of, if you're semi-open with what's going on in your life emotionally, you can say, well, I do get triggered. I do see that happening there. But triggers, of course, are words that we use for ways that we get activated, usually emotionally, quite often. Of course, there can be positive triggers, which we had talked about as well.
That's right.
But when it comes to relationships especially, we want to focus in on the triggering that is not healthy. So usually a trigger or a trap happens in your life, and often you have an overreaction, a very it's explained. I was about to say an unexplained. It's often explained, but it doesn't seem to be measured.
That's
the reaction to what the actual problem was. So a trigger, of course, as we know, if you think about a trigger in a weapon, it's just a little pin, and it hits just a little hit, and on this thing called a firing cap, and of course there's gunpowder around it. It's a little hit, and everything explodes. Or if you think about the case of a trap, it's something that a trap is set open and it's under tension all the time. There's always that tension, and maybe just a little step, a little touch, and snap, it hits, and there's a problem there again. So triggers, traps, that's what it is, and that's kind of our definition. So before we go any farther with the bunch of you that have already joined us here, and for those of you who are live, we want to engage you in the chat just a little bit. So we want to ask this. This is our informal survey that we'd like to do. No, you don't have to tell us what it was. You don't have to cop to anything. But let's ask you this: in the last week, have you been triggered or trapped in any way? If you have, put an X in the comment. If you have not, put an O in the comment. And let's see how the triggers and traps are going for our marriage nerds in the last week. So if you've been triggered, put an X in. If you've not, put an O in, and we'll come back to that in just a minute.
X's and O's, I like that. That's very
kisses,
good.
Hugs and kisses.
Hugs and kisses.
Hugs and kisses with being triggered, right?
So how well do you know your triggers? Did you get some time to think about that question that we left you with the last time we were together? What situations do you encounter where you are most likely to have an overreaction and react negatively? Overreactions, like Kevin said, they're not very good for our marriage, and we want to deal with them. That's why we're having this series. They can cause us to lash out in anger and frustration. Our overreactions can also cause us to shut down in sadness and depression. Both of those things don't help our marriages. When we're going along and all of a sudden, as Kevin said, there's tension and we don't realize we step in something. Maybe we're the spouse that's the triggerer. The triggerer spouse.
Right. Well, maybe listen,
maybe you just feel like you're a trigger, period.
Can I just say this? I was just looking at our informal survey.
Oh.
Most people put an X. But not everybody.
Oh, yes.
Not everybody.
See
and so
X's,
I think this might go to what you're saying. Most of us put X's. We've been triggered sometime this week, but a few of us, and you guys are amazing, O's. No triggers this week.
Love it.
Awesome. So I saw, there's a few of you, if you can see on there, and we appreciate you, but I'm just wondering, Lisa, if the O's are the triggerers. No, that's not fair.
Oh dear, that's not fair. Or they've been doing their homework.
We love the
really
O's.
doing great. No,
the O's are hugs.
Even the best of marriages have triggers in them.
We got
But
them.
like the O's in the chat, we do want to move, we do want to have less and less triggers.
Yeah.
And we certainly want to not trigger our spouse. And so that's the goal.
That's right. So we want to talk a little bit because look, if you got triggers that are happening in your marriage, triggers that you have happening personally, of course, they're going to spill out in your marriage, and your spouse needs to learn to navigate that, but you need to learn how to navigate that yourself. But if these are a reality, and even if the best marriages have them, we do well to learn in marriage how to get through, how to deal with, how to learn about. And that's what this has been about in our little series, right?
Yes.
And that's what we want to talk about tonight. So let me just start off with this. So many of you are part of our faith community of Milestone Church. We love having you, but not all of you. It's great to have any of you who are from outside that. But we have faith in God, and I wanted to start in this place. When it comes to triggers, there is an interesting story in John chapter 11 about two women, both who were triggered. Now, on the outset, I want you to know that this triggering that Mary and Martha go through is a very legitimate trigger. Their brother just died. So this is a very intense
Situation.
moment. It's,
Yep.
It's obviously very painful. And some of our triggering is very understandable when we go through events like this. And then others of our triggering can be, can be a huge explosion for not such a huge event.
True.
But in any case, Martha and Mary are in this story in John chapter 11. Their brother dies. Someone sent a message to Jesus several days before to come to Lazarus, their brother's side, because he was about to die. But Jesus didn't come right away. He took a few days to get there. And that triggered Mary and Martha, along with the triggering event of the passing of the brother. So I just want to get to what is interesting about this, and that is how different people can act in their triggers. The first part of the story in John 11, we got the woman named Martha. She, when Jesus is coming to her town, she runs out to greet him, or she runs out. Honestly, if you read it, she runs out to almost confront him. She's been triggered, and if you read it, you almost hear some accusation.
Yes.
You almost hear some blame. In fact, her words were, if you had have been here, this wouldn't have happened. So that you can see and hear the triggering there. You can hear, and woven into it is confusion and pain and wanting answers. So I've been triggered, I want answers. Her sister Mary, equally triggered, we find in the story, doesn't come right out to Jesus. In fact, people have to come back to her and sort of coax her and tell her that Jesus is out there. It's time to come out and talk to him. And eventually she does. But woven into the story of Mary, who is equally triggered, is this waiting, is this staying still when she's triggered, is this almost retreating, being sad, and contemplative, amongst other things. So you've got Martha, who when she's triggered, she's on the go. She's going right towards the issue. She's got questions, she's got demands, she's got a little bit of anger. And when you've got Mary, she gets triggered, she pulls back. She shuts down a little bit. She's somewhat quieter. And so we just wanted to throw that out because we thought that was kind of neat. When we were thinking about all this, we thought, here we got two women who are just like probably all of us. And so I guess just to keep the chat going, if you had to guess, and if you did your homework from a few weeks ago, we asked, what is your trigger? Let us ask this. Which of the two are you more like? When you get triggered, are you a Martha? I'm going right at it. Or are you a Mary? Pull back and get a little bit quiet. Because here is what we would say to you to understand. Both of those triggers are equally unhealthy and equally normal. So, it's not a matter of, wow, you're bad because you are more aggressive or you're bad because you're more passive. It's just better just to figure out, who am I more like? So no matter where you are there, that's okay. Who are you more like, Martha or Mary? That would be our question here.
Yeah, it's true. In the story, if you go back and read it, they say virtually the same thing to Jesus. Both women, when they do encounter Jesus, say the same thing, but with very different responses in the action that they took when they were triggered. So what is it for you? There are a lot of triggers. We talked about that in the previous episodes in the series that we're doing. Go back and watch if you would like to catch up, if you haven't watched before tonight. But really, there are, according to a doctor, Judith Siegel, there are 4 universal big triggers for people. So we just wanted to list those off for you, especially for the ones who wrote "oh" in the chat that I'm seeing. You know, maybe you feel tonight like, I really legitimately have no triggers, which is just impossible if you're a human being. So I think, and we don't want to be negative with you tonight, but we do want to help you to identify and then talk about the training, which we've been excited to get to. So these are the big universal triggers, apparently, and I think you'll agree when you hear them. And number 1 is envy. Nothing like that green monster, they call it, envy, to help you start feeling less than. No one likes to feel less than anybody else. And there's things in life, situations, events, or things people say that kind of make us feel less than, and that's not a good feeling. So envy, you know, anything that does something that causes you to feel less than or envious, that can be a big trigger.
I think it's somewhat ironic, but very real, that we can even experience envy in a marriage relationship, right? You don't naturally think that envy should show up in a marriage. It's just, we put our rings on our fingers, we're together forever, don't worry about it. But perhaps more than any other place, we have a tendency, even in our marriages, to make the other feel less than. And then this feeling of envy can really come up. So we have to watch for that.
And because we're talking about marriage triggers, and a lot of the research out there is talking about triggers in all areas, workplace, life, family, we think that envy, if you turn it into another form of jealousy, I think right there people would say for sure, jealousy is a thing that can exist in a marriage and be a real trigger when you feel something has caused you to feel a jealousy. So we won't stay there too long because we're going to get through a lot of these quickly so we can get to the good stuff. Secondly, rejection. Nothing like good old rejection to make you feel like overreacting or to trigger you into an overreaction. And in fact, the research says that social rejection, so rejection in a relationship, in the brain, the neuroscience says, equals to, the processing that goes on in the brain equals to when you undergo physical pain. So social rejection, the brain, whatever it's doing up there, they show through scans that it's doing the same thing as if you were to like physically get hurt.
That's amazing. I totally get it. It makes sense, but it's amazing at the same time. Just to experience rejection, they say, is the equivalent of actually feeling pain. That explains a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. So thirdly, criticism. We just love criticism in our lives.
No,
it's just something we invite. And it also really produces that feeling of less than. And we want to protect ourselves. There's a lot of people that will say that we are all a little bit narcissistic. And if you don't know what that word means, look it up. But it just basically means
if you don't know what it means, you probably
don't want to hear anything bad about ourselves. We would just like to hear good things about ourselves. So there's a vulnerability that we have to criticism, and we would like to protect ourselves. And the overreaction that we have when we're triggered by criticism is to protect ourselves. And fourthly, isn't this fun? And fourthly, control. Control. We don't like, as human beings, we don't like doubt. We don't like uncertainty. We want to know things are certain, that everything's okay. And
wouldn't that be great all the time?
It's true. And there's so many things that we can talk about, but it's so tempting to keep going on, but I'm just going to leave it at that and just say that we use control as a means of combating our anxiety about uncertainty, about the things that we fear and that we're worried about. And so when things threaten our control, we get triggered.
Yes.
And that causes us to have overreactions, often overreactions to some small things, events, something your spouse says, but it triggers your feeling of I'm losing control or I'm feeling less than.
Yeah.
So those are some lovely, lovely things that are suggested as big triggers universally in everyone's lives.
So we can't see you right now,
Yeah.
but if we ask for a raise of hands, how many people actually already knew this stuff? Everybody raise their hand. It's really not very, I mean, Dr. Siegel helped us to kind of put to words what things really trigger us, right? Envy, rejection, criticism, and control will explode when that happens. But you already knew that, right? Maybe those words weren't there, but you know when you look into it. So the summary of all of those things are that in our life, and Lisa and I have talked about that as we've built up towards this lesson about training for triggers, that we all need in our life connection. And we credit learning this from our friend Marian Gertz, who was also at our marriage retreat and spoke to many of you who are listening here. But she taught us about connection, that everybody needs connection. And what better place to find that connection is supposed to happen is right here in your
Very
marriage,
meaningful
right?
in a marriage.
So we need connection, we need acceptance, and we need love. Without those, I mean, this is where you nourish, this is where you grow, this is where you find fulfillment in your life. So remember, I mean, we've thrown all kinds of words at you, right? Here are the bad words: envy, rejection, criticism, control. Here are some good words. You need connection, acceptance, and love, but you really need those things. And what we know and what we're learning, and love being alive this time in history, because we're just vaulting forward in the brain science, and we're vaulting forward in learning what's going on up here and how dramatic it impacts, well, everything else. Of course, how dramatic it impacts your physical body that you own, that you have stewardship of. But what's going on in your brain also dramatically impacts this thing called your commitment, your connection to your spouse. And everybody seems to be talking, it's really in vogue right now to talk about the amygdala, right? The part of your brain,
yes.
Yeah, Lisa just said, the lizard brain. It's that what
Survival.
Scientists are trying to say is that really old, kind of primitive, it doesn't do much, but what it does do has been historically super important. It is the part that's all about survival. It doesn't have a lot of reason. It just gets a message sent to it, and then it sends messages out to usually react in some way. It also has a really cool job of sending out some juices, some hormones and other things like that to make you react. And so that's why they call it sort of that primitive brain. So long ago, if you were threatened by some animal somewhere, if you lived in a cave, etc., that amygdala gets in and says, hey, run, hey, hide, hey, all of those kind of things. So what's still alive and well in every one of our noggins is this thing called the amygdala. And it's a storehouse now for a lot of our painful memories. It affects our perception of danger. And when we talk about triggers, so unfortunately, our amygdala isn't really good at figuring out whether this trigger is big, like a lion is about to devour me, or if this trigger is not all that big, like the Wi-Fi went down again for the second time today, or something like that, or the dishes aren't done, or she said this. We don't really have that mature perception, and what it just does to your body is it just sends a message that this is bad, and this is equally bad. So it takes the rest of our brain to have to show up and say, hold on. Let's talk to our body. Let's calm things down. This isn't as bad as you think it is. And this is the whole point of triggers, right? Because when something goes off and the gunpowder explodes, it's just a big fire. So somebody, somewhere, and I'm saying it's you, right? Somebody has to learn and get some training in this area.
That's great. So we're going to get to the training,
Let's
and we're going to help you with some strategies and some practicals to really delve into. And we're also, really going to have the goal of helping you to increase your tolerance for the pain and the anxiety that's associated with the things that you're triggered with, because really that's what it is. We don't like pain. As Kevin said, the amygdala definitely doesn't like pain, and it stores all these things that have been painful, and then we associate something from today that happened in the past, and it gets all confused. So we need to become much more aware. And I do just want to talk just about something I saw in the chat, because it was a great question. Someone said, what about disrespect? And really disrespect is something that goes back to, as Kevin said, feeling loved, accepted, connected, and we all feel loved in different ways, right? So when we want to be loved, some want to be given gifts, some want, some even sex is equated with love for some people, and being respected.
A lot of people.
For a lot of people, and being respected is equated with love, or physical affection can be. So all these things, that's all kind of summed up in how a person wants to be loved. So yeah, there's tons of things that are the chat's talking about that really also are triggers for many people. So, and it's great that you're thinking for yourself, what is my trigger? And we're going to talk about an acronym. Did you want to introduce the acronym that we're going to?
Yeah, so here is this is what we're saying. If you are triggered, and you are, even the people who put the O's, eventually you get triggered, but most of us, did you see the majority of us have been triggered just in the last week over something? I didn't even ask if we got triggered today, but I bet still the majority of us probably have been triggered today. So we need, triggering happens, and then it often leads to trouble. But we'd like to suggest, if there's training, maybe you can
avoid
the trouble or some of the trouble, right? And so we've got a little bit of training here, and we'd like to give you this acronym that might help you in your training if you can remember it. And we know you got a million things to remember, but here's the word: MOVE. MOVE, M-O-V-E, and that's going to be our acronym. So when it comes to triggers, when they're happening, if you can see what your trigger is or identify that this is your trigger, perhaps you can tell yourself, speak to yourself and say, MOVE, and kind of go through these letters.
Yeah, so the letters, we'll go into them separately, but I'll just give them to you all at once, which is MOVE is for mind, if you can just remember mind. Manage your thoughts and feelings. For M. For O, options. Option your reactions. It's tempting to want to break it down. Okay. V, validate. Validate your inner value. And E, evolve. Expect to evolve. So we're going to go back and cover them all, but MOVE. Mind, options, validate, evolve.
All right, let's move.
Okay. So the first one is mind. Manage your thoughts and your feelings. And I just want to read a scripture for you in Proverbs chapter 20 in verse 5, a beautiful passage that helps us to even understand that we don't have to be scientists and psychoanalysts and have lots of letters after our names and be doctors to really help ourselves identify our triggers and traps and get training to deal with them. So in Proverbs 20 verse 5, the scriptures direct us, the purposes of a person's heart are deep waters, but one who has insight draws them out. So very simply, you don't have to read a gazillion books, but you do need insight. And reading lots of books does help you to gain insight. But we want you to be aware of what's going on in your mind. As the scripture says, draw out what is in your mind. You're two people in a marriage who both have deep feelings inside of you. Those are tricky waters, but person of insight draws them out. Scan yourself for hyperarousal. That's a way to know, that there's things going on. That hyperarousal. Well, we talked a lot about it in previous episodes, but it's when the stress hormones start to flood your body, cortisol, adrenaline. You might get a pain in your neck, or your eyes start dilating, or you blush, or your heart palpitates. You should always be scanning for those signs that you are approaching being triggered or have already been triggered. If you don't know what you're feeling, journaling. You probably hate hearing that, some of you, but
I hate hearing that.
I love journaling. And if you something is bothering you and you can't figure it out, if you sit down with a pen and paper and write it out, there's something about that physical act that connects you to your feelings in such a great way.
Or if you don't like journaling, you can do what I do with this stay-home order that we're in. I look out the window a lot.
There you go.
I don't journal, but I look out the window a lot, and I think.
There's a lot in neuroscience, as Kevin talked about, the brain. Learn about your brain. There has been decades of research that have been done recently that are amazing at helping you to understand what's going on in your brain. And tomorrow, actually, if you would like to follow us on Instagram at Wild Marriage, tomorrow, you better know that we're going to do this tomorrow. You're going to help me to put a post up with a lot of books and resources that we've been reading as we've been studying about and researching this.
There you go, everybody. Instagram is no longer for kids. It's for marriage nerds like you.
We're taking over. I think that's true. I think the young people are probably upset about that. We're leaving Facebook and we're moving to Instagram.
Yeah, they're all going to be gone.
We're following the young people.
Yeah.
Anyway, shouldn't have said that,
No,
but that's
you shouldn't.
okay.
Yeah. Don't tell
Prayer.
kids.
Prayer is a great way to know what's going on in your mind and thought. And then self-care. Really, your mind needs a lot of self-care. We pile way too much stuff into our minds and then wonder why we're just overwhelmed and so exhausted. And self-care, I don't mean self-medicate, because people do use things like alcohol to self-medicate. And those things, if they're not managed, do not help you with your triggers. In fact, the Bible says that wine is a mocker, beer is a brawler. Those things actually weaken your defenses to your triggers and actually help you to be more quarrelsome and more triggered. So we have to use self-care in proper ways. Know what we're thinking and feeling, know what our needs are, and how to get them met appropriately in the appropriate places. Overexhaustion, overextending yourself, you're creating an environment prime for triggers to cause you to stumble. So we have to take care of what's going on in our mind, in our feelings. I love this point. I've probably overcooked it, but I think it's so, so important. Take care of your mind.
So the summary, right? We're doing not an analogy. What's the word again?
An acronym.
We're doing an acronym, right? And the acronym was MOVE.
Yes.
The first one, I know everything that Lisa just said. Some of you just went numb. But you remember what's M? No, because there's so much there, so much good stuff there. But what's M, right? It's manage your thoughts and your feelings.
Yes.
Use your mind, so that's M. So when you get triggered, think, okay, I have some responsibility here. I can control this. The next one is options, O. So in the MOVE, this is the O, some options. And we're suggesting that you should option your reactions. Option your reactions, meaning you have options in the way that you react. This shouldn't be this isn't going to be a very deep point, but it could be one of the most frustrating
Very
points.
practical, very practical.
It could be one of the most frustrating points for you, because I know people who are triggered. And when you're triggered, you usually think, I have no options. My reaction is the only and the right reaction to have right now. But that's actually not true. And so we just want you to use your mind and think that there are options. So there are ways, even before you get triggered, you can decide when that happens, since I'm now seeing that I do get triggered by these things more predominantly than something else, you can decide, I'm going to react differerly. I'm going to choose how I'm going to react right now before it actually happens. And this is how people all around the world deal with it. I know that's something that Lisa is really, really excellent in. After there'll be a time in our marriage where we'll have a strong disagreement, an argument, a fight even, or if she gets triggered by something, that will happen. But then because she's so reflective and does a bit of journaling too, let's give her that. But she'll think, okay, this is what happened. And the next time, here's what I'm going to do. And I've always been so impressed with that. And I think that just goes to show, for those of us who are led by our reactions or led by our triggering, we're a little bit more animals, like I can't take any responsibility right now. We need to know that actually isn't true. Expect more of yourself in that way. So you can do this, of course, through the power of reflecting a little bit, thinking a little bit, create other options for the next time. So next time when this happens, whether it's somebody cuts me off in traffic, but we're talking about marriage. Next time something happens in our marriage, this is what I'm going to do. And if that can start working, just start thinking of the ways that will really help your marriage.
Excellent.
Another way to option your reaction is perhaps timeouts. You know, we recently wrote a book called Stay Home Marriage, and we talk a little bit about timeouts in that and the proper ways that you can do it. And there's improper ways that you can do that too. So just maybe you want to check out that chapter in our book, Stay Home Marriage, and you can order that off Amazon, or some of you have already got that, so just take a look there. There's an interesting thing when it comes to optioning your reaction as well. This is something you might have to rehearse a little bit, but if you can be honest in your reaction without punching back, so if your spouse says something that hurts you, maybe different people have tried these things where they're just honest and they say out loud, ouch, but they don't say it punitively like, ouch. No, not like that, but more just kind of saying, ouch, where you're reflective going, well, that's interesting. I'm acknowledging that something just happened there. I'm acknowledging my lizard brain just kicked in and I feel like running or hiding or attacking. Well, you just say, ouch. So you can do a little bit of reflective. Lisa was sharing this with me earlier today. Other people have done things like where they'll, what is it? They just sort of,
my lizard brain.
Just do that, meaning something just happened there. I don't know. That's between you guys and your relationship at home. But always do it in a way where you're doing some honest reflection. Okay, don't ever weaponize these type of things like, wow, you just did it to me again, or ouch. That's really not going to be very helpful, because this is what? This is which is option your reactions. You have some options there. And we just sort of laughed and we did that. Another one, when you get triggered, if you can do this, can you imagine all of us, when we get triggered, if we could inject some humor into the moment, how much it would help our marriage? Probably how many less regretful things we'll do and say if we just put a little bit of humor in. We've got 2 new sons. It's interesting. We enjoy it. We never had sons, and then our daughters married some, and we got sons. They're our sons-in-laws. But something that I really respect about both of the young men that my daughters chose to marry is that they do this very well. They'll inject humor into stressful situations, not in life, but I've even watched them inject humor, delicate, gentle, gracious humor into situations that are intense, even in their marriage. And so I'm impressed by those guys.
What, they have wives that are intense? How could that be?
Well, they say the nut doesn't fall far from the tree. Okay, on to the next one.
And everything that you just said is so good. And as you can see, there's a progression, because the mind, if you're not aware, you can't see it coming, you can't prepare, plan with the humor, all that kind of stuff. So that was great. So the V, validate. We want to suggest that you validate your inner value. Now, don't get all squeamish, okay, and think that sounds really, I don't know, flaky. It's not flaky.
Agey.
Validate your inner value. Just who you are. Remember back to that being accepted and connected and loved. Acceptance is being accepted for just who you are, not for anything that you do or offer. This is a really hard one for a lot of people. They feel like they're loved and accepted based on what they do for their relationships. And that's such a vicious cycle, and can cause us to be triggered when we feel like I haven't done enough to be loved or validated or accepted, and I'm going to lose my connection. So first of all, I'd like to say, stop the conversations that you have with your inner critic. And what do we mean by inner critic? There's that negative voice in your head that's always accusing you and telling you what you're not good at. And then when someone else wants to give maybe a constructive criticism or something happens, you just freak out because you're already feeling so down on yourself. So stop having conversations with your inner critic. Don't argue with your inner critic. Don't debate with your inner critic.
Just this is hard teaching.
Stop having those conversations. And again, go back to that brain science, because the more you do the same things, the more it gets ingrained in you. So if you do switch gears, like Kevin's saying, and pull out and have some humor, stop the negative track that you usually go down, you actually change the wiring in your brain, which is incredible. Trust the inner voice inside of you that wants to encourage you. There is an inner voice inside of you that knows you desperately need encourage and will help you build your self-esteem. A lot of our problems is we too much depend on other people for our value and our self-esteem. I know I do, and I'm sure many of you do as well. We too much, everything, we're not scanning ourselves to see how we're doing, we're scanning everyone else in our lives to see how they're relating to us and how am I doing in my relationships. And I'm getting self-esteem based on how well that is going. And so, of course, when anything gets threatened in our relationships, we freak out because we need that validation so desperately. So be aware of things like the guilt and shame cycle and how much of your past is brought into the present, and have compassion on your pain. Have compassion on the things that you've discovered, as that proverb talked about, drawing out the deep waters, the deep feelings. When they do come out and you do think about things maybe that have happened in your past. And again, another part of this is, if you need it, get counseling. Most of us, a lot of us need counseling, professional counseling I'm talking about. And that can really help you if you're having trouble really understanding any of what we're talking about tonight. That might also be an indication that you want to pursue that avenue. But this validation piece is so important. And I wanted to do it because I have deep convictions about it. And I just, like I told Kevin, I just want to sit forward and just look into the camera and say, like, you need to feel how important you are. From the moment you were conceived, God made you so special, and not for anything that you do, but just for who you are. You're not better than other people. We don't want to be the narcissist. You don't have to be better than other people. You're not worse than other people. You're amazing. Every single person is amazing, made by God, and we need that validation from God ultimately, obviously, but also allowing ourselves to nurture it inside of ourselves. We're so valuable. We are so in need of validation to know that. Did I say it enough?
This is where, I think this is where, especially where the Holy Spirit part comes into those of you who are followers of God. And the Holy Spirit, of course, as you know, is in an intercessory, communicating to the Lord really on your behalf in even ways and moments and times that you don't really know. And so there is so much about this value piece that is very difficult for us to understand. And yet if we kind of got it, it really would change who we are. It would help us with our trigger problem, but it would help us more in our marriage as well. So husbands and wives need to hear that. So we've talked about, we're talking about M.O.V.E, we've done M as far as using your mind, and O is there's options in the way that you react. And we just want to pause, I just want to pause there and say, when you look at your triggers, if you're hear what some of your triggers are, but also start to see what your first reaction is in them. Are you defensive right off the bat? Are you depressed right off the bat? Are you angry right? So what is, but there are other options there. And then V, to validate your value and to not really overreact in your trigger way. And the last one is E. And the E is very simply, seems weird because we talked about how much we have faith in God, but we're going to use this word. And we do. And that's the E is evolve.
And we believe in evolving.
And that is, when it comes to your response to triggers that happen in your life, expect to evolve. Expect that you will evolve. But over time, you are going to grow and change. We want to say this as we're fellow battlers of triggers that happen in life.
True.
You must personally enter into the area and the place where you remember, one, that you're not alone. You are not the only person that's getting triggered or gets triggered. You're not the only marriage that has triggering issues that kind of set you guys off the tracks a little bit and you have to get on again. You're not alone. You're just not, a good way to say it is you're just not that special. A lot of us have this problem. So don't feel so sorry for yourself, or don't throw babies out with bathwater, because you're not alone in that way. But also take comfort in the fact that you're not alone. This is not a race or a battle that you are all by yourself in. And with that you're not alone piece, what comes next is, of course, since you're not alone, you got to keep working at it. And this is something that, you know, we've talked about in our book a lot. We talk about it here on Marriage Monday for over a year now. We always hit on this, but just the importance of you keep working at it. Listen, if you're going to be married for as long as many of you have, or some of you are just starting out, if you're going to be married for as long as we have, you know, something we encounter every week, several times a week, honestly, is that didn't work. We're not getting along properly. Back everything up. Start it again.
Yeah.
What do we call that in Marriage Monday?
A reset.
Reset. Over and over and over again. And if you get irritated at resets, my friend, you are in a world of trouble. There's so many other things you should be irritated at in your marriage. Reset is not one
That's
of
true.
them. So trigger points and triggers need to be always acknowledged and then worked on. And don't feel like there's something wrong with you or your marriage that you have got these. What do we always say? You become what you practice.
Yes.
You become what you practice. Lisa just talked about this interval. You think about yourself, or you evaluate yourself based on the way you think about yourself. This is neuroscience now. You evaluate yourself based on what you know God tells you and who God tells you you are. And you become what you practice. You get good at the things that you do, and you don't get so good at the things that you don't do. So here's a suggestion: when you get triggered, expect that you will grow, reset things, and go at it again. You'll evolve, and that's very, very important.
Which is really exciting. It's very exciting. And I see in the chat someone said, was at church yesterday, because they said, what about fruit? So I think you can...
Trying to use my message
He's trying to use his message, yes. But that's great.
Don't play
I love
that
it.
game with me.
He's trying to get clarification and everything that we're talking about, even the work that Kevin's talking about. It's all a privilege, really, to be able to be married, to be able to be two people who are able to be insightful, as the proverb says, and whether it's fruit of repentance or the fruit in our marriage, it's all really a byproduct of our relationship with God, which is very, very helpful in the marriage department.
Right, and if you want to play that game about what about fruit, it does take patience to get fruit, and actually the scripture I didn't read yesterday, but the one that is found in Luke chapter 13, it is actually a story about a fig tree that's not bearing fruit, but the entire thing is about the patience of God there, where God comes and says, I need to pronounce judgment on this, but ultimately you don't want me to go off on a sermon right now, but ultimately,
why not?
You know, the worker says, give it another year, let me work with it. And so again, not to be theologically off here, if you want to tie that into marriage, though, it takes a great deal of patience to be willing to work on things. It takes a great deal of patience to evolve. And I'm telling you, patience is usually the missing problem in people who are not getting along with each other. Let me read you a scripture from Proverbs chapter 16 and verse 32. As far as patience is concerned, better a patient person than a warrior.
Ooh.
Pause for a minute and put that in marriage context. Better a patient person than a warrior, one with self-control than one who takes a city. In other words, it's better to be the spouse that has self-control than the one who always wins every single fight. But it takes time. And we'll conclude our analogy just with this. And again, we wrote a chapter in our book about legacy. And we'd encourage you to think a little bit about legacy. As far as this taking time to grow, being willing to reset is so very important. And you got to ask yourself, what kind of legacy do I want to leave? Now, here's where I want to go. When you're triggered, it feels like, when you're frustrated in your marriage, it feels like there's nothing more important than that triggering, whatever it might be. Choose any topic you want, things that frustrate you. It's money, it's him, it's her, it's this, it's that, it's the roof, it leaks, it's whatever. Whatever's triggering you, it seems like there's nothing more important in that moment. But ask yourself, what legacy do you want for your life? What legacy, if you have kids, what story do you want your kids to say about you when they tell the last stories about you, when you were in the coffin or when you're in the furnace? Sorry, but that seems to be our two options in North America right now, right? What story do you want them to tell? Do you want them to tell the story that Dad was just always a victim? He was always frustrated or sad and pulled, morose and hiding. The trigger that happens right this afternoon, the trigger that's going to happen tomorrow, as far as your legacy is concerned, and I know your amygdala won't let you think this, but you can control this. The trigger that happens tomorrow is not important in the big story. And your brain is telling you, this is the only thing that's important. Right now I have to say what I feel like I have to say. But it's actually not really important. The important thing is your story. The important thing is your legacy. So check that out. Think about that. If you want to read a little bit more, we've got that legacy in our book, Stay Home Marriage, and you can kind of check that out as well.
Stay Home Marriage, very appropriate because, again, when we wrote this, we were told to stay home. And again, we've been told to stay home. So why don't you order our book and stay home and read it together, and you can work on your stay home marriage.
That's funny. We had no idea we were being so prophetic when we heard that, and we hope that this is the last one. At any rate, so that's our analogy, excuse me, our
acronym.
An acronym. Boy, I just can't get those words here.
Move away from your triggers and away from the things that trap you. And it's great to identify what those things are, because there's a lot of unfinished work that we can do with our thoughts and our feelings about ourselves, about life. And tonight we were talking about yourself, what you can do, the self-care, the things that you can do to help yourself to move away from your triggers and traps. Come back next week because we're going, in 2 weeks, because we're going to talk about how you can help your spouse. Really, there's no place where you can find what we're talking about, that intimate connection, the love, the acceptance, where you can just find all the things that you've dreamt of since you were a little, person dreaming of getting married.
A little person.
A little person.
I've never been a little person.
A lot of our issues come from when we were little persons, even those who, were in great families. We all had things that didn't quite help us to feel loved, accepted, connected. And we are in a position as married people to really work out, to draw out the deep waters, the feelings, to work on our issues together and to provide that safe place for each other.
That's right. So remember, everybody gets triggered. A few of you haven't been this week. Congratulations, write a book. You guys are awesome. The rest of us, and the majority of us, do. Our suggestion is try to remember our acronym MOVE. Use your mind, right, to
manage your thoughts.
Manage your thoughts. Realize that you have options as far as your reaction is concerned.
Try them.
Validate your own value as well, and realize it's an evolution. It's going to take some time, but it will get better.
And expect, though, it will get better.
That's right. So thanks, everybody, for being with us. We really do appreciate you taking time on this Monday night. We know that your time is valuable, even during a stay-home emergency break, etc.
And we're going to be back on April 26th, so that's in 2 weeks. We normally do have this episode every 2 weeks, except for the holidays that kind of whatever. We're going to be back. If you are not already subscribed to our YouTube channel, please subscribe, and then you will get notifications when we are back. But we are back April 26th.
So we're going to talk a little bit more. We don't want to wring this to death, but we're going to talk a little bit more about triggers and traps the next time we get together. And we're going to be talking about how to help the other one at times of triggers and traps. Wouldn't that be good? So we'll hopefully see you again, April 26th. And until then, stay safe and keep moving. Good night.
Good night.